Hello, you're joining us again in the weekend edition of Into Vietnam, which summarizes the most outstanding business news and expert ideas on the economy in the week ending between June the 23rd and 29th. And here are the headlines. Vietnam gross domestic product rose by 5.18% in the first half of 2014. The EU assess on ODA cooperation in Vietnam. And the European Union topped the ODA grantor for Vietnam in 2013 will be the theme of this week's Business Talk. First of all, let's begin with this week's figures. The General Statistics Office said on June the 27th, the Vietnam's gross domestic product is estimated to rise by 5.18% in the first half of this year. The country's GDP grew by 5.09% in the first quarter of the year and accelerated to 5.25% in the second quarter. The service sector continued playing an important role in the country's GDP increase, which rose by 6.01% in the first 6 months of this year, contributing 2.57 percentage points to the country's GDP growth. The industry and construction sector increased by 5.3%, contributing 2.06 percentage points. The agriculture, forestry and fisheries sector grew by 2.96%, contributing 0.55 percentage point. In terms of economic structure, the service sector accounts for 43.6% of GDP. The industry and construction placed 38.7%, and the agriculture, forestry and fisheries sector contributes 17.69%.
The General Statistics Office said Vietnam's Consumer Price Index or CPI in June is estimated to have risen by 0.3% on month, up 4.98% on year, and up 1.38% from December 2013. In details, as many as 10 out of 11 baskets of goods contributed to the calculation of the CPI data saw their prices increase this month, in which prices of medicine and healthcare reported the highest price hike, which soared by 0.74%. Prices of healthcare service jumped by 0.87%. Prices of housing and construction materials, including rent, electricity, water, fuel, and construction materials, came the second, which rose 0.61%. Prices of beverage and tobacco increased 0.3%. Prices of food and foodstuff, which accounts for the highest part of the cake of CPI calculation, increased by 0.28% this month. Prices of food fell 0.43%. Prices of foodstuff increased 0.54%. Prices of eating outside inched up by 0.15%. Prices of culture, entertainment, and tourism increased by 0.27%. Prices of garment, footwear, and hat rose 0.22%. Prices of household and appliances rose by 0.2%. Prices of traffic increased 0.18%. Prices of education edged up 0.01%, and prices of other goods and services went up by 0.23%. In the downside, prices of postal services and telecommunication baskets fell by 0.13% this month. Not included in the CPI components, gold prices in June dropped by 0.12% on month and lost 9.79% on year. The US dollar's prices this month gained by 0.49% on month, 0.57% on year, and 0.32% from December 2013. In the urban area, this month CPI edged up by 0.3% on month and increased by 5.32% on year. In the rural area, this month CPI ticked up by 0.19% on month and rose by 4.49% on year.
June industrial production index were estimated to increase 0.5% against the previous month, and this figure was also up by 6.5% against June last year. The processing and manufacturing industry posted growth of 7.8% in January-June period against the same period last year, while its consumption rose by 9%. The industry higher consumption increases versus that of production is a positive signal for industry recovery and development, in particular and for the whole economy in general. Officials pointed out that a number of industries showed high growth rates in the first half of the year, including road steel production, automobiles, and mobile phones. Coming up next is some major macroeconomic and investment news. According to the latest report of the Foreign Investment Agency, Vietnam attracted $6.85 billion of foreign direct investment in the first half of 2014, down 35% as compared to the same period last year. Of the total, $4.85 billion came from 656 newly licensed projects, while the remainder was from 219 existing ones, which raised the level of capital. In a brighter spot, the period FDI disbursement saw a modest increase of 0.9% and was estimated to touch $5.75 billion. The manufacturing and processing sector absorbed the largest share of FDI, touching $4.8 billion or 70.2% of the nation's total registered capital. Construction and real estate trading industry ranked the second and third, respectively. Among the 41 countries and territories investing in Vietnam, South Korea is the leading source of FDI, with $1.55 billion accounting for 22.6% of the total FDI registered in the country. It was followed by Hong Kong and Japan. The economic hub of Ho Chi Minh City is the most attractive destination for foreign investors, with $886.3 million, or 13% of the nation's total FDI, followed by the southern provinces of Bình Dương and Dong Nai. After maintaining continuous downward trend during the past 3 years, in the first half of this year, foreign currency credit has bounced back strongly in the context of stable exchange rate. Between January and June, the disbursement rate of the foreign currency loans at credit institutions is estimated at 10%, which is 7 times higher than the overall credit growth of the whole economy. The loan-to-deposit ratio is approaching 100%. According to estimates by commercial banks, short-term foreign currency credit accounts for 80 to 90% share of foreign currency loans. In this case, strong foreign currency credit growth seems to go against the direction of management agencies. Foreign currency loans are still in the priority groups, while Vietnam's economy is export-oriented with high import demand for raw materials. Secondly, the exchange rate adjustment is not much and still favorable to the borrowers. Seven banks, including Sacombank, Vietinbank, Agribank, Vietcombank, Asia Commercial Bank, Military Bank, and National Citizen Bank, have signed the credit contracts in District Number 1. They pledged to give preferential loans totaling 820 billion dong, or $39.05 million, to 42 enterprises in Ho Chi Minh City. The companies operating in prioritized sectors are offered an annual interest rate of 8% for short-term loans and 11% for medium to long-term loans. This year, the city's program to link banks and businesses has benefited nearly 600 businesses, cooperatives, and households. The amount of pledged funds totals around $673.43 million, with interest rates ranging between 7% and 11%. Government bond market has breakthrough development in terms of scale on the Hanoi Stock Exchange, with total mobilization of 586 trillion dong in the last 5 years, up about 75 times compared to 2009. On the secondary market, as of May 2014, the value listed on HNX reached 625 trillion dong, up nearly 4 times compared to 2009 and reaching 17% of GDP. The liquidity of the government bond market transactions increased by 4.5 times in the first 5 months of this year. According to the Vietnam National Administration of Tourism, the country welcomed more than 4.28 million foreign tourists in the first half of 2014, a year-on-year increase of 21.11%. Among those coming to Vietnam were tourists from Hong Kong, China, who recorded the highest growth of 140.6%. Followed by Germany with 115.8%, Laos with 38.8%, and China 37.4%. Domestic tourists traveling the country were to have reached 23.4 million, up 6.9% year-on-year, bringing the country's tourism revenues in the period to 125 trillion dong, or $5.87 billion, up 22.5% against the same period last year. Further, Ho Chi Minh City recorded nearly 2.1 million foreign arrivals, equivalent to 40% of the year's plan, and up 10% on year, while Hanoi attracted 1.39 million, a surge of 17.4%. Vietnam and Japan held their first high-level dialogue on agricultural development cooperation in Hanoi on June the 26th. Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development Cao Đức Phát said, the event aims to seek a consensus on the draft of bilateral cooperation in building medium and long-term visions for the comprehensive development of Vietnam's agricultural sector and work towards specific activities for the 2015-2019 period and beyond. In the coming time, the two sides will focus on cooperation in science, technology, and the application of new technologies in agricultural production, processing, and post-harvest preservation in order to increase the food value chain. The Japanese side presented a dialogue cooperation framework and shared their future plans, stressing the importance of building a food value chain strategy. The Japanese Ministry of Agriculture appreciated Vietnam's potential for agricultural development with favorable conditions in human resources, land, and climate, noting that over the past time, many Japanese businesses have seen effective investment in this field in the country. The EU delegation to Vietnam held a press conference on June the 25th in Hanoi to release a report on its official development assistance for the country. How can this policy be fully utilized, particularly in the context that Vietnam has become an average income nation? More to follow.
At a press conference, Frank Jackson, ambassador, head of the EU delegation to Vietnam, said, in 2013, the European Union is still the largest ODA provider globally, with 56.5 billion euros, representing 0.43% of its total national income, and accounting for more than half of the total value of global ODA, focusing on poverty reduction and inclusive growth. In Vietnam, the EU has disbursed 456 million euros in 2013 and pledged 542 million euros in 2014.
EU vẫn duy trì cam kết mạnh mẽ với việc ủng hộ phát triển các tham vọng thương mại và cam kết quốc tế của Việt Nam bằng cách duy trì mức độ tài trợ trong những năm tiếp theo, ký kết hiệp định FDI vào cuối năm 2014 và tăng cường quan hệ chính trị.
Looking at the 7-year periods from 2007 to 2014, the EU's ODA for Vietnam dropped from 720 million euros to 542 million euros, down 25% in the period. It is because Vietnam has become a middle-income country since 2010. That is a major influence on the approach of a number of EU donors in bilateral development assistance. Related to the EC issues and Japan's ODA suspension for rail projects in Vietnam, head of the EU delegation to Vietnam said, Vietnam and the bloc have long-term cooperation which lasts for over 25 years. Therefore, these incidents will not affect on EU aid, and it will continue to raise the level of multifaceted aid and assistance to Vietnam in the current economic difficulties. However, he recommended Vietnam should actively reform its administrative procedures to speed up disbursement process, because in the past 7 years, the country has been disbursed only 50% of the total capital committed.
Mr. Van Zetten, head of the EU delegation to Vietnam, affirmed the European Union and European Commission have a long-term development cooperation plan with Vietnam. The EU's financial institution has always been reliable and responsible in using the fundings. Let's join our talk with Mr. Van Zetten to have a more profound understanding of the EU's official development assistance to Vietnam in the past time.
Hello, and thank you for joining our program on VITV. The first question is, experts have recommended as Vietnam is now a middle-income country, the ODA should be a catalyst to attract other funding sources, as well as to attract financial institutions to take part in projects in the countries. And the ODA should have Vietnam to avoid the middle-income trap. So what is your take?
I think the focus on how to avoid the middle income trap is very important. It is important that Vietnam continues to develop and develops at a relatively fast rate. You are in many ways in a golden period of your society's development with a very young population, increasingly well educated. Moving forward, the boost that you get to your economy from having a young population would be less and less, because you will also be getting older with time as a society. So to get that process right now is very important. If you ask about the EU support, our support is in the form of grant aid, and therefore we are not looking to supplement that by other funding sources. What we do is pure grant assistance, going from the EU to Vietnam, and we cooperate with your government to identify the best way to spend those funds.
What are your assessment on the implementation and deployment of EU's ODA to Vietnam in recent years?
I have a very positive assessment, partly in terms of what we have achieved. I think the results from our support have been quite good. I also have a positive assessment of how we have spent our funds. We have a system of a very intense scrutiny of the funds that we've been spending, including external audits, and so far as I can judge, we have been operating very correctly with the Vietnamese government and vice versa.
Regarding the fact that Japan has halted some railways projects to Vietnam, so do the EU projects face the same problems?
And the way that the companies are being looked at in Vietnam. I often think that we should not make a strong distinction between Vietnamese companies and other companies, European companies, but we should look at what is good for Vietnam. If you go to Europe, it is quite unusual in Europe to think about companies in very national terms. We look at one company in one European country as operating as belonging to that country, whether or not the ownership.
What are your recommendations for Vietnam so that it will effectively manage the ODA in the future?
My recommendation is that the procedures for ODA disbursement could be simpler than they are currently, and a simplification process would be welcomed by us in order also to speed up the whole disbursement process. I think that in many of the activities we do, it's very important that we work closely with civil society, and therefore, as far as possible, that we make sure that we work with the relevant groups within the Vietnamese society and they work with us would also be helpful.
Thank you for answering our question.
You're welcome. Very nice to meet you.
Recently, the State Bank of Vietnam has adjusted the interbank exchange rate between Vietnam dong and US dollars up by 1% from 21,036 dong per dollar to 21,240 dong per dollar. According to the State Bank of Vietnam, the adjustment is aimed at supporting exporters and ensuring economic growth. Our following business report will reflect the reaction of businesses on the information.
According to businesses, the exchange rate adjustments this time will bring benefits to exporters who mostly buy materials from domestic sources. For example, a company with 85 to 90% of revenue coming from exports will benefit $2.2 billion per year, thanks to 1% higher exchange rate. This amount is not large, but it can be made use of to increase the competitiveness of their products on the export markets. The most beneficial sectors include seafood, rubber, minerals, and information technology, especially when these products are exported to the US or EU.
Nhìn chung, nếu mà nói với ngành xuất khẩu, tăng tỷ giá là một điều tốt cho doanh nghiệp. Tại vì suốt một thời gian nhiều qua thì hầu như là các chi phí cho phục vụ cho sản xuất đều tăng cả, nhưng mà giá bán thì không được tăng. Có thể nói là điều chỉnh cái tỷ giá này thì góp một phần nào tạo cho doanh nghiệp có những cái điều kiện để cạnh tranh hơn.
In addition, those enterprises who import large volume of materials annually will be somehow negatively impacted. The steel industry is an example due to the imports of materials and steel embryos. The garment and textile sector will also be affected. However, the impacts on imports are not serious. Enterprises say the adjustment is not a surprise, and they have prepared plans from the beginning of the year.
Nói chung bây giờ tỷ giá bây giờ là mình có lại, thành ra nhà nước tăng tỷ giá là mình có lại. Mình mua mình trả tiền người Việt, tại vì tất cả đều mình thông qua ngân hàng, phải trả nhà cung ứng thì bằng tiền Việt, mà tỷ giá lên thì mình có lại. Nhưng mà các nhà cung ứng người ta cũng biết cái tỷ giá tăng, người ta mua nguyên liệu vô thì phải trả bằng đô, còn mình là mua nguyên liệu của ta mình trả bằng tiền Việt, do đó người ta sẽ từ từ tăng giá lên nữa, thì lúc đó mình sẽ khó sống.
Doanh nghiệp nhập khẩu nó sẽ có những cái ảnh hưởng vì chúng ta phải nhập khẩu với cái giá tiền Việt Nam nó nhiều hơn thì nó cũng khó khăn cho việc tăng chi phí và giảm lợi nhuận. Nhưng mà nếu nhìn chung tổng thể thì cái này nó không tác động nhiều. Cái thứ hai nữa là cái nhập khẩu của chúng ta hiện nay nó cũng đang ở mức khiêm tốn và có mức độ thôi, chứ nó cũng không có cái tăng như các năm trước. Bây giờ chúng ta đang cần khuyến khích cái xuất khẩu, và cái chính sách thì bao giờ nó có hai mặt, chúng ta chấp nhận cái mặt nó lợi nhiều hơn, còn tất nhiên cái mặt mà nó tác động xấu ngược lại nó cũng chịu ảnh hưởng một chút ít, chúng ta phải chấp nhận thôi.
The State Bank of Vietnam said, in the context of control inflation in the first months of the year and the stable exchange rate in nearly a year, this adjustment is to support exports and economic development. Moreover, according to businesses, the support is not really significant, but it has positive psychological effects on their production.
Điều chỉnh tỷ giá làm sao phù hợp phải thấy là thứ nhất và phải dựa vào cái diễn biến của thị trường, tức là nhưng mà phải kịp thời. Tức là chúng ta không thể là chúng ta nói rằng đây là một cái lộ trình, thì tôi thấy là không lên cái lộ trình. Tức là chúng ta điều chỉnh tỷ giá dựa trên cái diễn biến thị trường, thời điểm nào phù hợp thì chúng ta phải mạnh dạn lên, thì từ đó thì chúng ta mới có thể nắm bắt cơ hội. Còn nếu chúng ta nói là phải theo cái lộ trình thì nhiều khi cơ hội sẽ không lớn với mình nữa.
Data from the General Department of Customs showed the total export-import turnover of Vietnam in the first 5 months surpassed $116 billion, up more than 13% on the year, in which exports hit $58 billion, up 15.9%. With the exchange rate adjustments, exports in the last months of the year is forecast to rise. The State Bank also affirms that it will coordinate necessary measures to ensure the forex market and stable exchange rate on the new price level.
And now the foreign trade news, we continue the program.
According to a report by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, the revenue of Vietnam's agro-forestry fishery exports in the first 6 months of 2014 is expected to hit $14.67 billion, up 11.2% year-on-year. In June alone, Vietnam is likely to collect $2.22 billion from farm exports. Major items of Vietnam farm exports witnessing growth in export revenue in the 6-month period include paper, cashew nuts, wood and its products, seafood, among others. At the same time, rice, rubber, tea, cassava, and its products remain items seeing declines in both export volume and value. Vietnam's agroforestry fishery exports totaled $27.4 billion in 2013, increased by 0.7% year-on-year. It is expected that the sector exports to hit $28.5 billion in 2014. Wood processing exports are likely to reach from $6 to $6.2 billion this year. Wood exports reached $2.87 billion in the first half of the year, up 15.3% over the same period last year. The US, China, and Japan are Vietnam's 3 biggest importers of wood products, comprising 66.74% of total export value. In recent times, many international wood importers have placed orders in Vietnam instead of China due to more competitive prices. Vietnam imported nearly $1.23 billion worth of goods in the first half of the year, up 82.3% over the same period last year.
The Vietnam Leather and Footwear Association, or LIFASO, said leather footwear and handbag exports are expected to top $12 billion this year, achieving the target. They were worth $10.4 billion last year to rank third in the country's list of key exports, with footwear exports going up by more than 14% and handbags by over 18%. The industry imported nearly $4.2 billion worth of leather and other raw material last year, which accounted for 40% of its total export revenues. Up to 70% of the leather needed for footwear and handbag production was imported, mainly from Republic of Korea, Taiwan, Italy, and Thailand. Only 40% of fabric and other raw materials can be sourced locally, and the country spent more than $3 billion to import fabric and other raw material last year, mostly from China.
As usual, the final part is the summary of the local securities market between June the 23rd and 27th. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for your attention. For comments and feedback, you can reach us by email at intovietnam@vitv.vn or give us a call at 0422208288. Goodbye and see you later.